Good morning. This is the BLAINESWORLD webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You can also get more information at my website, which you can't really see right now, but it's blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce two guests from one of my favorite organizations in the area. And they're both from Pisgah. And they are Tracy Gruver, Legacy Giving Officer, and Attorney David Bartholomew. And he's the Homelessness Prevention Program Director at Pisgah. Wave to all you fans and friends who are watching this. So if you're watching this, you can wave to everybody. David, you now met these two folks. Let me just tell you in terms of their background. Tracy Gruver is a fundraising professional who has worked in the nonprofit sector for 5 years. Previously, she worked in education as a high school English teacher and academic coach for teachers. She enjoys working for Pisgah Legal Services because of particular interest in their focus on helping to move people out of poverty. David brings over a decade of valuable experience as attorney, particularly in advocating for and servicing the needs of the region's most marginalized populations. His current role as a homelessness prevention program director as a community and economic development attorney speaks to his passion for social justice and his ability to affect meaningful change in the lives of those in need. So let me start off by asking you both, and I'll start off asking Tracy, in terms of getting involved in fundraising. As a child, you grew up where?
I grew up in Northwest Ohio.
Okay, and when you were a child growing up in Northwest Ohio, did you see yourself as being a fundraising professional or working for a nonprofit
Absolutely
organization?
not.
That wasn't your
No.
goal as a little 5-year-old? You didn't run around?
Nope.
What did you
No.
want to do as a little kid?
As a child, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Okay.
And then it switched to a singer. So I've been all over the board.
Well, what got you into this? Kind of interesting. So what got you into fundraising?
Um, when I went to graduate school after teaching, I took a course in grant writing and found out that I was really good at grant writing and I enjoyed it. And so that kind of got me into the nonprofit space, and just developed into from grant writing to full-time fundraising. And it was just a really good fit. So here I am.
And you've been with Pisgah how long?
I've only been at Pisgah Legal since January, so I'm very new there.
Okay. Then
Mhm.
we'll talk about this later, but one of the things that Pisgah needs, I guess all nonprofits need to raise funds. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And that's your
Mhm.
job. Okay.
Yes, that's what I do. I just go out and talk to people and spread the word so that they can support.
And to make sure David has enough funds to do his job, we're doing all the cool
Yes.
stuff he's doing. And so I'll ask David then the same question. So you're an attorney, David. You grew up where?
So I'm from Waynesville, North Carolina, just 30 miles west. So I grew up there, and I can tell you, I did not. We have no lawyers in my family. I definitely did not think about being an attorney. I think I wanted to be a baseball player, a basketball player, a football player, depending on which season it was. Unfortunately, I did not have the talent for those things. But I ended up getting, involved a little bit in politics. I was a journalism major. And at some point I realized I wanted to do something to help my community. And I looked at teaching like Tracy did. And I looked at a couple other things, and some friends said, well, you should consider law school. And I ended up applying, going to the University of Georgia Law School in Athens and practicing at Georgia Legal Services and Georgia Law Center for the Homeless in Atlanta, and then in Augusta before coming back to Western North Carolina in 2018. And I've been at Pisgah since then.
So again, your primary practice in the legal field has been in the nonprofit sector.
That's right. Yeah. Since I knew when I went to law school, I wanted to do public interest law, but I wasn't really sure. I thought maybe I would be in criminal law or maybe working for the city. But I had an internship at Atlanta Legal Aid and helping. It was the Disability Integration Project. And I realized, that so many people in our communities and in this country, can't afford attorneys and need attorneys. The bureaucracy, the systems that we have to navigate are just very difficult. And I fell in love with that and then started hoping to one day be lucky enough to work for a legal aid organization, and really happy to be at Pisgah.
And it's really cool you kind of found Pisgah or vice versa, because if ever there was a perfect opportunity for you, it would seem to be, it's almost like it was written for you, that you'd be doing this kind of work.
It was, as soon as I did love working in Georgia, and I had great colleagues there. But my parents, my family, I was very grateful to learn about Pisgah and hopeful that one day I would be able to get a job. And yeah, it was great to be able to come back and do the work that I love here in the community I love.
And for the benefit of folks, Tracy, who don't know what Pisgah is, if you could kind of, I guess, keep it to under maybe an hour or two, if you could just give the overview of Pisgah. Because no, we laugh, but there's a lot of stuff you could talk about for Pisgah. So what is Pisgah all about?
Yeah, so Pisgah Legal Services is a nonprofit organization. We are based in Asheville, but the organization actually serves all of Western North Carolina, 18 different counties. We have 15 different programs that we provide to the community. So a lot of folks know that Pisgah Legal does, say, services for domestic violence victims, or they may know that Pisgah Legal does, housing services to try and prevent homelessness. But we do many, many other things, like help people who have lost their driver's license to get their driver's license back. Or we help with immigration law. We help with consumer law. So like if a person is a victim of a scam, we help with things like that. So as I said, 15 different programs spread out across the region. So mostly the most important thing that I think people should know is that we help low-income folks who can't afford a civil attorney. And we served about 24,000 people last year. So the services that we provide are wide ranging and also serving a lot of folks. We're very busy at Pisgah Legal.
And what I didn't know until recently is that you're not just in the Asheville area, but you have offices or branches elsewhere throughout the state, the Western North Carolina.
We have, I believe, 8 total locations. Is that right, David?
We're always adding. So I know, I do think that's right. I think we have 8 brick and mortar offices right now.
And David, you work out of which office?
So I work out of the Asheville office, and I do my actual representation is limited to Buncombe County, but I do community economic development in all 18 counties, and then our team, we're in 13 counties doing eviction prevention and homelessness prevention.
And the thing I don't see, I'm looking in your office there, I don't see your roller skates, in terms of getting around. I mean, that's a pretty big area that you're in different areas and different courts. You're serving all these folks.
Yeah, we do have a couple of staff cars. I have a Yaris, which is pretty fuel efficient. Don't think I'd be too good on the roller skates, but luckily, because of the offices, we have 2 attorneys working out west. We have a couple of attorneys working in our northern counties. We have 2 attorneys working in our southern counties. So we're able to provide coverage and build expertise with those court systems and the local bars there.
And the sad thing, as we're talking about it, is that I guess you're always going to have a job, unfortunately, that, and I'll have Tracy to address this a little bit in terms of the people you serve. You mentioned numbers. There are a lot of people you're serving in terms of just caseload, I guess. And it's always growing, or it's never, you're always needing people.
Yeah, so one statistic that I've heard is there are 8,000 people in North Carolina for every 1 attorney that does the kind of work that we do. And so what that tells you is that, there are thousands and thousands of people in our state who are not able to afford legal services and who need them. And so we do the best that we can. We serve as many people as we can. Our attorneys work very hard all year long, tirelessly, but there's just no way that we can address the actual need that exists. We would need a whole lot more funding and a whole lot more people, a whole lot more attorneys to be able to handle the actual need that exists. It's just attorneys are very expensive. And so there are a lot of people who just are caught in that middle where they just can't afford it.
And mention too, Tracy, if you would, so the kind of work you do, you should tell people it's not just for like routine stuff. It's people kind of really need your stuff. Give me some examples aside from David's work. What are some of the kinds of services you provide to folks?
Sure. So, as I said, we do immigration work. We just had a clinic recently, a couple weekends ago, for people who had fled Ukraine during, the start of the war. Well, now that they're here, they came here legally, but they have paperwork that needs to be filed in order for them to stay here legally. And, so we had a clinic where some of our attorneys helped those people to do that paperwork and provided interpreters, because it's complicated paperwork. It's stuff that most of us would never understand how to do, let alone if we didn't even speak English. So we offer services like that. I mentioned the driver's license restoration program. So we have an attorney who, when someone loses their driver's license because they can't afford to pay a fine or a fee that's associated, which happens if you're extremely low income, you may have a $200 fine that you can't pay. Well, that means you will never get your driver's license back. You could go the rest of your life without getting your driver's license back if you don't pay that fine. So we have an attorney who will help folks to navigate that system, and possibly find the money for them, or help them figure it out, because those are the things that just the system is set up so that there's more fines, more fees, they get tacked on, and so it just becomes an insurmountable problem. We also have attorneys who help low-income folks to file tax returns. This is something I didn't know until I started working here. If you're under a certain income level, you don't have to file taxes. So of course you don't. But if you don't file those taxes, then you miss out on credits like child tax credits, earned income tax credits. And that's money that they would get back to go in their pocket, but they don't even know that they're eligible for it. So we have volunteers who help people to file those taxes so that they can get that money back. And those are the people who need it the most, right? They're very low income folks. Those, hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars can make a huge difference for them. So, that's just some examples of what we do every day.
Didn't Pisgah also help, or are you still helping with when Obamacare first came out? Pisgah was one of the driving forces behind that.
Yeah, that's another one of the programs that we do. We have volunteers who anybody can call in, make an appointment to have a volunteer help them go through the process of signing up for ACA healthcare or Medicaid. And our volunteers will walk them through the process, because I don't know if you have ever had to sign up for health insurance on your own, but it's pretty complicated. Lots of deductibles and premiums and, all of these things that most of us really don't understand. And so the volunteers will help guide you through that process, and it doesn't cost them anything to get that assistance.
Say that, Tracy. I remember when Obamacare first came out, I was going to volunteer to be one of the people who help at Pisgah, and it was almost too overwhelming for me. David, I don't know if you've seen it, but the paperwork to apply for something, it's just so overwhelming. Compliment also, Tracy, I think it's the Bar Association. You also have a lot of attorneys. Do they give pro bono work, or they do? Is every attorney has to, or what's the deal on that, David? Or do you know you have to give it so many hours of pro bono work?
Yeah, so the state bar is aspirational and asking attorneys to donate some of their time, 50 hours a year, to pro bono service. And it is not mandatory, and it's not monitored or anything like that. So, but there are, of course, a lot of attorneys who want to get back to their community here. And once, Pisgah Legal Services, more than any organization really I've ever worked with or heard of, really makes a point to engage the private bar to make sure they're aware of what the issues our community is having, and to look for, expertise and people who are willing to help out and do that and spend some of their time, providing free pro bono services. And it really expands the kinds of services we can give. I know from my perspective, being an expert in housing law, there's lots of areas I'm not familiar with. And when we try to help incorporate a nonprofit, it's nice to be able to go to a firm who has somebody who's done that 20, 30 times and assist us and share their knowledge and help somebody, help our community.
Also, I imagine for attorneys, especially newer attorneys, a great way to pick up experience or something in areas they're not familiar with, to volunteer for Pisgah, great way to pick up some experience.
It certainly is. Like last year, we ended up, the homelessness prevention program ended up trying to get some fellows, mostly new attorneys into our area. Many who are working with firms or had hung a shingle by themselves and wanted to do some court experience and wanted to help defend people from eviction. So we did some CLEs, so they would get continuing legal credits and train them up so they could assist with the eviction crisis we're having. And actually, some of those people right now are helping us with cases right now that we don't have the capacity to handle.
And since we're talking, David, about your area of expertise, if you would talk a little bit about it, and I guess I only know about it through a mutual friend of ours, Tom Gallagher, I guess I'll mention his name, of course, who used to do some of the same kind of work, right? He was working with the homeless population, some of the stuff he was doing.
Well, Tom is a legend, and Tom Gallagher did it all. And unfortunately, I only got to work with him here for a couple of years at Pisgah. But I can tell you that we still have an award that is handed out on a weekly basis called the Gallagher. He did a lot of work with family law, consumer law, foreclosure, and yes, eviction prevention. So he basically did it all and was an amazing litigator. So we definitely miss Tom Gallagher. But yeah,
Does he know about that? Does he know about the award?
well, I wouldn't want to, get his, I don't think he likes compliments about as much as I do, I think. But no, Molly Maynard had lunch with him, I think, a month ago, and I think he does know how much we miss him. But if he doesn't and he's listening to this, Tom, we miss you very much.
Well, talk a little bit about that though, because I was just overwhelmed by what you guys do, and what's sad about it, I thought, David, was that it's needed. The point is, and talk about why it's needed, if you would.
Yeah, well, I think everywhere in the country, what we're seeing is, increases in housing prices, increases in evictions, and increases in homelessness. And those things are all, of course, all correlated statistically. But one of the problems we have in Western North Carolina is, we have rising rents and we have rising home ownership costs, but we don't have the wages that have gone up quite as fast. We don't have the economy of some of the cities that are facing similar issues, right? When you look at a lot of cities in our country, including southern cities like Atlanta, Charlotte, Raleigh, neighboring cities, they have similar issues, but they have huge economies as well. And Western North Carolina, of course, doesn't. We have a great tourism industry, we have a great healthcare industry, but those are lower paying. So what that creates is a situation where people are cost burdened. And that's a statistic that we measure, and it basically means that over a third of your income is going towards your housing costs, your mortgage or your rent. And most of our clients are cost burdened. In fact, over 50% of Western North Carolinians are in that situation right now today. And when you're paying more than a third of your income towards rent, that can work out if everything goes well, if your car doesn't break down, if you don't miss a couple of weeks due to work, if your child doesn't get sick, if you don't have another issue come up. But anybody who's tried to make it work, who's worked lower wage jobs, they know that it's not likely that you're gonna make it through a full year's lease without one of those things happening. And so when that happens, that can lead to eviction. And eviction is what we're trying to prevent at Pisgah Legal Services with our team. We want to make sure that people know their rights and can avoid that disastrous situation. Of course, it makes a huge difference for those individuals that we're able to help, but it also makes a huge difference for our community because evictions are very expensive and we end up paying for them in other ways.
Well, you raise a good point, David, and if you could address the issue that if somebody is facing one of the situations you mentioned, that they're housing, paying one third of it, and all of a sudden they lose their job, they get sick, whatever. What do you tell folks, or if they come to you and say they just can't pay the rent? And where I want you to talk about too is the idea that if that happens, what you shouldn't do, and I guess what you shouldn't do is just stop paying or just ignoring your problem. What should you do?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And I will be the annoying attorney and say it depends.
Right,
that's
okay.
the attorney's favorite thing to say. The truth is it does. The individual situation, the contract, and all of the facts, those are things we want to assess. But in general, we do have people who are in a situation where they've fallen behind for one reason or another. What we would advise them is of their rights, how the process works. We often will try to talk with the landlords, especially if it's an issue that, is one of those things. Their car broke down, but we've been able to find, some assistance to get their car fixed, or we've been able to hook them up with a bus pass such that, they might be able to afford it going forward. So we try to look at each individual situation and look at it and see what caused the problem. So when Tracy's talking about all the other programs, it's possible. I had a client last week who is eligible for Social Security disability, but they had been denied. But we were able to connect them with a benefits attorney who does that. And we were able to talk with the landlord and say they're going to get approved for Social Security disability. Once they get that, they'll be able to afford their rent. And so, when somebody comes to us facing an eviction, we're going to look at their individual situation, but we're going to try to help them navigate the situation, make sure their rights are enforced, that they have the time they need if they have to leave, or if there's a way for us to figure out what's going on and solve the problem, negotiating with the landlords, we'll do that. And of course, Blaine, if we have a bad acting landlord, a landlord who's acting outside the law, then we'll take them on in court and defend our tenants' rights that way. And hopefully, through litigation, get them what they are entitled to.
Now, if someone goes to Pisgah, what I hear you saying is almost in the process, they should do it before they're evicted or before they get the eviction notice, because I guess it's easier for you to deal with it then than after the fact.
No question about that. There's far more opportunities for us to get involved the sooner. If somebody falls behind in rent and they get an email or a text from their landlord, that's a good time to call Pisgah. The eviction process in North Carolina moves pretty fast. It's called summary ejectment. And after the notice, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be in writing, an eviction can be filed and the process can be over in as little as 2 weeks. Wow. And so when somebody falls behind and they get a notice and they know there's an issue, that is the time we want people to reach out to Pisgah Legal Services. What we can do then is properly advise them on their chances and have a chance to negotiate and see what's going on before there's actually an eviction filing.
How about somebody who's living in West North Carolina or Asheville area, and their apartment is not being taken care of? In other words, and unfortunately, you have that a lot too. Sometimes it could be the tenant's fault, but oftentimes it could be the landlord's fault. What should somebody do if their repairs are not being made in a timely fashion, or the place is not being taken care of? What should they do? Call Pisgah. Yeah. Call Pisgah.
Yeah. Good question. Yeah. Always call Pisgah. But yeah, so we have an older housing stock and we have very wet weather. And of course we have mountainous terrain. So we have conditions issues throughout our service area. And I guess what I would say is the first thing, is to try to make sure your landlord knows. And the best way to do that is to make sure you're communicating in writing. And I'm not saying that you have to start off with a certified letter. You can certainly call a landlord, but you need to think about following up with a text or email, because the landlord's duty to repair those things starts when they know that there's an issue that needs to be repaired. And that can be an evidentiary problem for us if we end up in litigation with a landlord who refuses to make the repairs that the state law requires them to do. So I would say, communicate in writing, be nice, but, use dates, be clear about what you're requesting, what the problem is, and ask for that repair in writing. And of course, if there's no response or they fail to do that, you should contact Pisgah Legal Services, because landlords are not allowed to waive their right to repair things that have to do with the habitability of the place. In other words, whether or not it is safe and has heat and has air, and is basically a habitable place, a safe place for someone to live.
I find this hard to believe that there are actually landlords in West North Carolina who don't abide by the law and don't do what they're supposed to do. I find it hard to believe.
Yeah. Well, I will say a lot of landlords really do want to do the right thing. And a vast majority of the people I end up working with do want to do the right thing. But yeah, there certainly are people who will take advantage of people in weak positions. There are people who are trying to cut costs and really shouldn't be landlords because of the, it's a good investment for many people, but there are costs and unpredictable costs with being a landlord. And so there are some landlords who are in positions where they probably shouldn't be. They should look to sell the property. But Pisgah is a big part of holding those landlords accountable. I know, when we get somebody who cuts the power off, if there's no attorney to call and threaten that landlord and to take them to court and get a temporary restraining order, if those stories aren't out there and landlords don't know that could happen to them and they could have huge legal fees, then I think we would see more and more landlords being willing to press tenants and to threaten them and take advantage of the fact that there's nobody out there to protect them.
Well, now, because you're on the Blaine's World show, everybody's going to know about it. So that's one of the things.
That's right, landlords.
And talk about that, Tracy, in terms of if people are listening or want to find out more, I'll ask you two things. One, what's the best way to get in touch with Pisgah? Phone or email or come in, or what's the best way?
Yeah, so the best way to get more information about what we do is to go to our website, which is just pisgahlegal.org. There's information about all of our services there. You can find information on how to support Pisgah Legal, on how to become a volunteer. You can get information if you need help. But if you are a person who is looking for specifically help from Pisgah Legal, then the best thing to do is to call, and I'm looking up the number now so that I don't misspeak. But people can call our Asheville office, which is 828-253-0406. And what happens when you call that number is that you get put through to a screener who is going to ask you some questions, and they're going to get to, whatever is the problem that you are experiencing. They're going to ask you questions about, your income and things like that, to make sure that you're eligible for the program, and they're going to direct you to the appropriate person to get you help. So anybody can call anytime and just ask questions. We may not be able to help. We can't help everyone who calls, but we can certainly point you in the right direction. And I know for a fact that, the wonderful people who answer those phones all day give a lot of advice over the phone. If somebody, what David was talking about earlier, if somebody falls behind on rent or, they need help with electricity, there are other nonprofits in the area that may be able to help with an electric bill, or may be able to help when you fall behind on your rent. And so sometimes the folks who answer the phone will say, hey, I think you should call ABCCM. I think you should check with this nonprofit or that nonprofit. And so it never hurts to call and ask.
The name's escaping me, but there's a nonprofit, their show on it several months ago, helps with transportation. Dave was talking about bus. There's a group, names maybe off the top of your head, provides cars.
Yeah.
Working Wheels.
It's Working Wheels.
Great organization. Yeah. And that's, there's help out there. But the problem, I guess, Tracy, where you come in, a lot of people don't know the help is out there. They just never thought about it. But Working Wheels certainly gets people involved. What about also, Tracy, people volunteering? Do you take volunteers?
We take a lot of volunteers. So I talked earlier about, volunteers are the ones who help people enroll in ACA and Medicaid. We have volunteers who do tax preparation. We have, of course, attorneys who volunteer with us. We have a lot of retired attorneys who do volunteer work with Pisgah Legal. We have people who help answer phones, screen calls, who stuff envelopes, you name it. We've got volunteer opportunities for a myriad of different things. And it's very easy to get started. If you are interested in doing that, you go to that website, pisgahlegal.org. There's a button that says volunteer, and you just fill out a short form on the website, and somebody will contact you and talk to you about the different options and figure out what's going to be a good fit for you. And I mean, as far as I know, it's pretty much, whatever you want to put into it. I think we have volunteers who have been with us for 10 years. And we have volunteers, who just come a couple of times and they feel like they're done. So it's, it really just depends on how much you want to put into it.
That's why you mention that, because I encourage folks to volunteer for lots of reasons, but sometimes it even leads to full-time jobs. I know some of the Pisgah who actually did that, came as a volunteer, several months and led to a full-time job. So it's just kind of a great way to get your foot in. But also, I guess, David, you could address this too in terms of college students, especially pre-law students or even law students. What a great way to pick up valuable experience. Do you have any law students volunteer also?
We do, yeah. So we actually have, I believe, 5 law clerks for this summer. So we have a law clerk program, and we encourage law students to start applying really for next year, like towards the end of this year. So in November and December. And they are here for the summer. I have one who's doing eviction prevention, eviction diversion services. And so far it's only been 2 weeks, but amazing. But yeah, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier, it was my law clerk and internship that got me into legal aid, that recognized this was an area of huge need and that there are so many amazing people, and that doing the work together, was a real way to make a huge impact on our community. So we certainly do. We're lucky to have law clerks and volunteers of all kinds. We have UNCA students who last year helped by going to the courthouse and doing some basic data analysis, getting copies of all the evictions, and looking to see what kind of difference it makes to have an attorney. And of course, it makes a huge difference when a tenant is represented in court versus when they're not. So yeah, it's a great opportunity, and we really encourage people to come check us out, come volunteer. There's so much to do, many different opportunities. Beth Herman's great, our coordinator for volunteers, and so we'll find something. And it can be, a couple hours a week, and we can find something for you to do.
What I always find when people volunteer, and you probably hear the story all the time too, is they say they get so much more out of it, than they thought they would. It's just like everybody says it's just a great experience to be helping other people as well. Down the road, so you're doing all the stuff you're doing, David. Is there anything you'd like to be doing more of, or if not more, that's all he has to hear, Tracy, more of, or some other area that if you had the manpower or you had the woman power that you'd like to be doing, or Pisgah would be like doing more of? Can you see it?
Well, I'll just say we'd like to have more capacity to help more people. I mean, every week it's a matter of how many cases can we take on as a team, and how much time can we spend on them. So I think, one of the things about this time in Nashville is there's a lot of people who are becoming more and more aware of these issues. Just in the last 18 months, the National Alliance to End Homelessness has been here with recommendations for both the county and city, and some of those recommendations have been put into place. I think that's going to make a huge difference. This year, the city of Asheville is doing their affordable housing plan. They brought in Enterprise, and city council will be taking that up with a work session over the next month. And so there's a chance for you to get involved with your community around these big issues, because if we don't do something about the affordable housing issues that we're having as a community, then we're going to continue to see people who are cost burdened and at risk of eviction. And some of those people will not be able to be helped, and they will become homeless. And so I really think it's a good time for people to be aware of what's going on in your community, to be engaged with that. It's a nonpartisan issue. It's about helping, people have the right to a home, and be able to afford that. People who are working, and people who, everyone really deserves a home. So I think that's what I would hope for.
Moving forward.
Can I
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I add to what David just said? I think everything he said is so accurate and so important. And I think that people need to understand that it's not just about housing, because if you are at risk of losing your housing because you're cost burdened, that means you're not going to go see the doctor because you can't afford to, right? You're not going to eat healthy food because you can't afford it, because all of your money's going to your rent. You may lose your car because you have to pay the rent rather than pay the car payment. So there's just all of these pieces that go together. And I think it's just really important that people understand that as long as we have this issue, as David said, the community suffers. Everyone in the community suffers because their health is not as good. Their education is not as good. And so it's something that we really need to address in order to make our community a good, healthy place to live.
In terms of addressing issues, Tracy, if you can talk about one last thing that Pisgah is facing, but a lot of other organizations is facing as well. Mm-hmm. But I understand there's a constant need, I guess, to raise more funds for Pisgah, just to provide the services that you provide right now. What's caused that? Or has always been a battle for Pisgah that they're always looking to raise funds and to get money to pay for these services?
Yeah, I mean, so every nonprofit organization, has to raise funds every year. And we're no different. And we try to grow every year, which means we need to raise a little bit more money each year, which is always a challenge. But we've also seen some pretty significant funding cuts from the federal government. Lots of people probably read some articles in December about this. Our domestic violence program, the funding was cut, and we were facing about $1 million shortfall for our budget because of those funding cuts. And so basically, we knew that was coming. It had been kind of coming for a few years, but there were also additional funds that came down because of the pandemic. And then when those funds ran out, that's when we got to the point where the rubber met the road and we had this shortfall. And so what we need to do is figure out going forward, how do we make up that shortfall? Because we know that money's not coming back. So we're going to be faced with this problem moving forward, as far as we can go. So we are trying to figure out, how do we raise more funds and how do we make ourselves more sustainable? And one way that we do that is just by always being out in the community, telling people what we do, asking for support, because we don't want to keep going to the same people over and over to ask for funds. So, we know that people are moving into Asheville every day. So we are trying to get out there in front of those people and let them know what we do and let them know how they can be of support to our organization. And so that's where people like me, I'll go to churches and talk to people, go out to different community events and just so that people know what we do and how they can support us.
If people want to support you, I guess that's also at the website as well?
It's on the website. There's a big button that says donate.
Okay, so, and that's, again, the website.
We make it really easy.
Again, the website was what again?
Pisgahlegal.org.
Okay, and Pisgah, for the benefit of people who don't know how to spell it, is?
PISGAHLEGAL.org.
And anything too, we talked about volunteer opportunities, they'll find them there as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. And David, a final question of you, in terms of, in a perfect world, 5 years from now, what you like being done with respect to some of the work you do?
Well, I'm excited about some of the pilot projects throughout the country that have basically required that people facing eviction get an attorney. And there has been some interest locally in that. And we have met with some funders about that. Of course, when you're faced with a criminal offense, you are entitled to an attorney, and the drastic consequences for someone facing eviction, we believe, they should be entitled to an attorney too. I'm excited about the politics of affordable housing changing. Like I mentioned, I would really like to see the city, the county, the region, the state, the country, take steps to, fund some of these programs to realize that people cannot afford to live where they work, and put in place policies that will address that. And then, yeah, I think I'm excited to see people like in our community get excited and be involved in the political process, be involved in the continuum of care, in the affordable housing plan, and going to community events and just becoming more informed about these issues.
And you raised a really good point there, just to kind of repeat it, is the fact that a lot of the services you provide, I guess, are not required by law, which is unfortunate, right? If you get a criminal charge, you have to have a lawyer, right? But if you get a notice of eviction, you should have a lawyer, but you don't have to have one. Is that the case?
That's right. Yeah. So it makes a huge difference too. I mean, in the outcomes and knowing your rights and in what will potentially happen, whether you'll be homeless or not, really can come down to having somebody advocate for you who's familiar with the landlord-tenant laws, familiar with tenants' rights and your rights, and can help you protect your rights under the lease and under North Carolina law. So it is a situation that, you know, can make a huge difference to have an attorney. And we would be hopeful. I mean, there are cities and even states, Washington State, you know, where it is required. And so we're getting data on that and how much really, you know, it ends up saving communities because homelessness is expensive. You know, we see that here in Asheville. They're building shelters, providing services, the loss of potential business revenue. You know, it's a problem that, you know, can be so expensive for the individual, but also for our community. So looking at ways to prevent that, you know, I think I'm excited about the opportunities that our community has right now to make some big steps.
All right, David, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of the BLAINESWORLD Show, Tracy as well. And I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. Hopefully we'll see you somewhere in Asheville sometime in the near future. Thanks, guys. This was great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Okay, appreciate it.